Okay, wait. That slide seems really intense and
Sure.
hard to me because I'm not an engineer. So if you had to dumb it down in terms of when do I need to start considering a pivot, when would that be? When no one's buying, when no one's...
When you can't exit, when this becomes your entire cycle, when all you're doing is continuing to adjust your product to find a customer, you probably are not in a business.
How long do you hang in there on something like that?
Well, part of it is a little bit of an IQ test. If you hear more than a few people saying the same things over and over again, you have to question whether there's actually a market or whether your product has hit a need, right?
What if you think you're so new and so cool that it would be impossible for people to validate it because what I'm doing is just so mind-blowing that there's no way for them to understand it?
So that to the earlier point in the lean startup, you can't cross that chasm to get mainstream until you get over that hurdle. So your iteration can go on as long as your money can go on, right? Your burn rate, if anything, is going to be the biggest dictator of how long you can iterate. And many investors get tired after years of continuous pivot and iteration in really saying this isn't a business, right? You can't settle on a market and you can't find a price point and you don't have a stable product. So it's not a business.
Can you think of one of the worst pivots you've ever been involved in as an example of bad pivot versus good pivot?
Well,
you can pick on one when you were working for me if you want. I can tell from the look on your face. You can go for it.
I'm tending to suggest that Tom and I worked at a time where we made a very good pivot, I would say, for the company, but we made it for reasons that didn't support the pivot long term. Right? I think that the idea is that the company was a product company and the pivot was to become a services company. And this is Real Networks that we're talking about. And mostly when I started and Tom started, we were a product company that made Real Player. And that was the development driver of the business. But then content became the development driver of the business, and we were in a video subscription business. And that pivot was very important for the company. But it was a little bit ahead of its time in terms of it was pre-Hulu and pre-Netflix, so really the customer usage patterns weren't well ingrained. There was a challenge around pricing because the only comparable price point was cable subscription services. You didn't have a Hulu or a Netflix subscription even on the DVD side of Netflix at that time to think about that. And probably our only other real competition was the emergence of TiVo at the time, in terms of changing customer viewing patterns for video and how people were watching asynchronously from linear television. So it was a good pivot for the company, but it was probably a bad pivot from a timing standpoint. We were not the company to be the leader in that pack for other reasons that had nothing to do with the idea of the service offering. But being ahead of its time, we weren't able to really nail on this process, and ended up iterating through it so many times that ultimately our partners who were involved in it got tired of participating, right? So that's another reason you end up falling is your investors or your partners just don't have the patience anymore.